So let's put what you learned to work here. I'm going to challenge you with a little exercise, and it's not too hard, don't worry. What we're going to do is sort the movies in the Movie Lens dataset by their popularity using Hadoop. And this is very similar to what we did before, right? Because before we were counting up how many times each rating occurred. Now all we have to do is switch that to count how many times each movie occurs in the dataset. So we can say that the number of times a movie was rated is a proxy for how often it was watched. So it's legitimate to say that the output that we get is going to be a measure of each movie's popularity within this dataset. So that's a good place to start. Just go back and modify that script, the ratingsbreakdown.py script, to count up movie IDs instead of ratings. And that really should just be like a one-line change, unless you want to, take the time to actually change the name of the class or something. So go back to your virtual machine there and use Nano to edit the existing ratingsbreakdown.py script and see if you can do that. That's a good place to start and a very simple thing to do. Even if you're new to programming and new to Python, you should be able to pull that off. Now, if you are more advanced and you want a little bit more of a stretch goal, I have a second challenge for you. See if you're up for this one. So, start with that first exercise first. Make sure you can actually be comfortable with making changes to the script and actually run them and get some confidence at least. But if you want to move on, here's your bonus points. So I want you to sort the movies by their numbers of ratings. So actually sort them by popularity. What you're going to get if you just do things the way that it's done currently in the ratings script, you're just going to get a list of each movie sorted by movie ID, and they're associated with counts of how often it occurred. And if what you're trying to figure out is what are the least popular and the most popular movies, that's not going to be a very useful order, right? You don't want it ordered by movie ID, you want it ordered by popularity, by the number of times each movie was rated. So this actually makes for a good example of doing something a little bit more complicated with MapReduce, and it's also a good example of how you often need to think rather creatively in order to solve problems using the MapReduce paradigm. And, quite honestly, the contortions you have to go through mentally to force things into MapReduce is a big part of the reason why people tend to use higher level systems instead. But it can be done. So here's one strategy for doing it. So in the mapper, what we can do is output movie ID for the key and then 1 for the value. Okay, so just like we were doing before to count things up, same idea. But then when we get to the reducer, what we're going to do is output things flipped. So instead of movie ID and the total count of ratings, we're going to flip that around to actually output the rating count as the key and the movie ID as the value. Okay? And then we will chain a different MapReduce step to that. So you can actually do a map and a reduce and then do another map and a reduce, or you can actually leave steps out. So in this case, we're going to do a map and a reduce. That will leave us with a set of rating counts and movie IDs for each unique movie ID. And then we can send that into a second reducer. And the reason we do that is because that sends that through that sort and shuffle phase. So by going through sort and shuffle, it will automatically sort things by rating count for us. We don't have to do that outside of our script. So just by virtue of sending it through a second reducer, we can end up sorting things by that first value of the output. Okay? So there are some things here you need to learn about first. One is how do you set up more than one MapReduce step using MRJob, and how do we make sure things are actually sorted properly? So let's talk about that. So I'm going to give you some code snippets here. I don't want to challenge you too much and make you discouraged, so I'm going to give you the pieces you need. All you really have to do is put them together here. So to actually define a second step in your job, you can do something like this. So here we have the original mapper get ratings and reducer count ratings functions. And then we can set up a second step that will actually send the output of that reducer into the input of this reducer after it's gone through shuffle and sort. Okay. So if you actually had another mapper and another reducer, that reducer's output would go to the input of the next step's mapper. So you can tie a reducer to another step's mapper, and then that mapper's output will go through sort and shuffle and then through to reduce. But in this case, we're actually just skipping the mapper entirely and just passing things right through to the reducer after they've been sorted. Okay. So this is how we define in the steps in MRJob how we can actually set up more complicated MapReduce steps that actually depend on one another. The other thing we need to do is make sure things get sorted the way we want, and this is a little bit tricky. You would think that it would just work, but it doesn't, and that's because we're using streaming. So everything is just a string from the standpoint of streaming. So things will be sorted as strings, and that can cause problems because if you sort, for example, the value 100 and the value 4 numerically, 4 comes first, but alphabetically 4 comes after 1. So you will get the wrong results if you just do things the naive way. So what we need to do is zero pad our numbers so that they sort properly. A little bit of a hack. I mean, there are better ways of doing this. You can actually set Hadoop up to use more structured formats like JSON or something that actually preserves type information while it's using streaming. But just to keep things simple, let's just zero pad our numbers so that they do sort properly when treated as alphabetical strings. And to do that, your reducer there will end up looking like this from the first step. What we'll end up doing is converting that sum of all the count of the rating counts into a string, and then we're going to use zfill on it, which zero fills from the left up to 5 digits, okay? So what this will output is the rating counts forced into a 5-digit number, zero padded on the left, and then the actual movie ID. And then that, again, gets fed into the next stage where those string values all get sorted before we finally output it. Okay? And finally, if you are familiar with Python, you might want to close your eyes here because I'm kind of giving away the answer to some extent. But if you are new to Python, I should probably teach you how to actually iterate through those results instead of just calling sum. So when you do get to that second reducer, it will look something like this. You are going to receive a list of sorted counts and the movie associated with that count. Now, normally there'll just be one, but there could be 2 movies that share the same count potentially, so there could be more than one that we need to show. So what we're going to do is say for movie in movies. So that means that for every movie in the movies iterable list, we're going to go through them one at a time and assign each individual movie to a variable called movie. And then we will yield the individual movie in that list and the count of how many times that movie occurred. And that will be our final output for this challenge. So your job, go off and make it happen. Good luck. Refer to these slides as necessary. And like I said, I gave you pretty much everything you need. You just have to put them together. So see if you can pull that off, and I will see you in the next lecture where we can check our results.